Hello everyone, welcome back. Welcome to our topic for week 4 discussion tonight. It's all about governance. So good morning, good afternoon and good evening, wherever you are around the world today. Thanks for tuning in. This is our final webinar discussion on the Program Management Professional short course tonight. We're going to talk about a couple of admin things just to put you in the picture of what's going to happen as we wrap up this course, things like the exam and that sort of thing. First of all, just want to thank everyone who's been tuning in for the last 4 weeks. Thanks to everyone who's put some excellent comments and questions up on the forums. Thanks for all of your feedback, your questions, your input, and thanks for your feedback and answers in the poll that we just had. So it's always very valuable for us to get a bit of an insight as to what everybody thinks. There is sometimes a survey link that we might send through to students afterwards, which is a slightly more comprehensive survey. And we do ask and encourage anyone that has some feedback or would like to give us their thoughts to fill that in. It's usually in a couple of minutes, but that's optional. But I just want to thank everyone who's joined in and taken part and helped us make it useful for everybody else along the way. Now, as usual, we are going to use the questions box. I will go through the basic housekeeping things. There are a couple of different things in the housekeeping this week. So obviously the questions box, we want to still encourage and hope everyone has got questions, comments, thoughts, anything you want to say, you want to add, throw that up in the questions box, and we'll do our best to incorporate that throughout the webinar tonight. As usual, we've got myself and Philip both giving you a discussion this evening. We've got an overview, high-level theory type stuff talking about governance, and then we're going to hear from Philip about some practical elements with governance controls. So the questions box is obviously the place to let us know anything you want to add. The online course portal, it's still the go-to place. That's where you're going to find everything. It's where you're going to find all the recordings as usual. It's also where you're going to find next week's exam. Now, I just want to let you know what the story is regarding this online test. It is 100% online. It's going to be found at the bottom of the portal. So there'll be a week 5 down the bottom underneath everything that's there already. There will be a link visible there when the test is live. Now the test will go live next week at around about the same time as you would have expected to be attending the webinar, except obviously next week there's no webinars. That's when the test should be available. That link should be working and visible. Now we've got what we call an assessment period, 1 week, and it'll begin when the test goes live. Now this 1 week assessment period is when people will qualify for a certificate. So it'll only be for people who have enrolled prior to when the exam or when the test goes live. So you have to have enrolled before Tuesday of next week. And during that week, you'll only be allowed to have 1 attempt at the test. So there'll be 1 go. It'll be a timed test. There'll be a time limit that will be spelled out in the instructions for the test. You'll have the clock ticking once the test begins. You won't be able to stop the clock. Even if you log off and come back to it, the clock will keep ticking. So anyone who gets in there in that week, you can start it whenever you like, but you'll only get that limited time period. We won't be revealing any answers until that assessment period has finished. So at the end of that week, what we do is, first of all, we release the exam, let everybody get their marks and their answers back again, and we then open it up to retries. So anyone at that point can resit the exam and look at anything they want to do, have it on a go at it, etc. You're welcome to do that as many times as you like. However, if you haven't already sat the test during the assessment period, you won't be eligible for a certificate. Now, for those who do the test during that period, the assessment, the certificates will be based on your score. You need to get at least 50% or higher in order to pass and get a certificate. I believe, and I'm putting a disclaimer on this because I haven't had it confirmed by the person who does the certificates, but we believe that the certificate will show your grade, and the grade is based on the standard university grade. So if you get 65% or above, it's a credit, 75% or above, and it's a distinction, 85% or above, and it's a high distinction. And I believe that should be listed on your certificate. All right, so hopefully that puts you all in the picture as to what to expect regarding the exam. Of course, it's open book. You know, you're welcome to look at any of the material. What it's going to be based on is the pre-recorded audios, the audio lectures that are uploaded into the portal, and the webinars. It will not include content that's only located in the texts because the texts were not provided to you. That's optional reading. Okay, so it's only going to be what's in the either pre-recorded or webinar recorded audio. All right, now if you've got any questions regarding the exam, I'll catch them up at the end, throw them up in the questions box as you think of them if you like. We'll bring it to everyone's attention at the end. But you can do you can sit the test at any point during that week. All right, but once you sit down and push go, the timer will start and the timer will finish at the end of it. So, but you can choose at what point during that week that you do that. So hopefully that spells it. The certificates, we've already covered that, so I've elaborated on the certificates. So as I said, any questions during tonight, throw them up to the questions box. We'll answer it before the end. And of course, for those of you who haven't yet found it, that's the address for the portal. That's where you'll need to go to find the exam. All right, so we're going to talk about one of the really interesting things about programs and portfolios. And, of course, I say interesting a little bit tongue-in-cheek because often when we start to talk about things like governance, we start to talk about the dry, the restrictions, the boring, the got to do it this way kind of attitude when it comes to portfolios and programs and projects, etc. Well, to some extent, we have to be a little bit used to that. We're kind of aware that when we are dealing with programs and portfolios, we're dealing with a structured approach to doing something that's fairly big, convoluted, and complex. Governance is part of the embodiment of that. And what we're going to talk about tonight is to try and separate some of the differences between governance and management and try and separate these two. And we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between the governance of different levels of an organization. So here it is in a nutshell. We're going to elaborate on all of these things as we go through the discussion tonight. The one thing we're not going to elaborate on to any great extent is project governance. That's kind of just there for a comparative basis. So we are going to talk a bit about corporate governance because this is the parental governance component from which portfolio and program governance will define. So corporate governance, it's about the strategic obligations, expectations, its commitments. It's about how does the corporation or how does the organizational entity define its strategic rules of engagement? What are the high rules, the master rules about what happens in that organization? And most pointedly, it's about decision making. And what we're going to talk about is how that corporate policy, that corporate governance of decision making translates into portfolios and programs. Because when you're looking at it from the corporate point of view, there's some specific high-level things that we'll elaborate on. Now, when you get into portfolio and program management, it is inevitably quite blurred. It's not about demarcation. It's not about saying, well, here's exactly what it's like in portfolios and here's exactly what it's like in programs. It doesn't quite work like that. But we're going to do what we can to highlight some of especially what the Program Management Institute talks about and how it separates the ideas between the two. But we'll also talk about where they overlap and where the alignment runs all the way through. So, and then we've got a bit of a comparison there. We talk a little bit about project governance just as a comparative basis in the pre-recorded audio. So we're not going to elaborate too much on that here. So let's start with where all this comes from, which is corporate governance. And to some extent, this is a bit of a new fandangled idea. It's a bit modern, the idea of corporate governance and large entities actually, holding themselves accountable for things. And when I say modern, it's like the last couple of decades, this sort of thing has become far more prominent. And it's become so because of a few things that have happened and a few organizational institutions that have brought into play guidelines, requirements, and restrictions. And you'll find that stock exchanges, for example, have over the last 20 years tightened up a great deal of their requirements for compliance and for corporate governance. You've got certain laws passed in various large economic groups like European Union and the US have passed laws requiring certain minimum standards of corporate governance. You've got the OECD and various other entities creating guidelines of how large corporate entities should be governed. But because a lot of these are global, they're trans-border, they don't necessarily work under exactly the same corporate governance requirements when it's imposed at the national level or even at the economic level. So large multinationals need to have their own corporate governance because if they're going to manage themselves as an organization globally, yes, they could probably deal with different rules in different places, and to some extent they have to. But as an ideology of how they want to govern themselves as an organization, there needs to be a common thread throughout the entirety of that organization's functioning. So it is a bit about compliance. It is a bit about adhering to the requirements and the rules and the laws and the standards and the restrictions. But actually, that's just the tip of the iceberg. There is a lot more that corporate governance takes responsibility for and tries to manage and operate. And much of that does translate down into what happens at the portfolio and at the program level. Now, some of the even the compliance things, as we mentioned a moment ago, some of them are voluntary. Some of them are opt-in by particular organizations. So if you think about the ISO, the International Standards Organization, those entities that choose to strive to meet those, and let's say they do meet them, well, that's a voluntary opt-in thing. But if you think about that from a corporate or an organization's point of view, if they've met an ISO standard and they've achieved an ISO qualification, that's part of their branding and the differentiation. They're going to have corporate governance that helps to make sure that those standards are adhered to throughout the organization, and that differentiation that they've achieved is not threatened by some misalignment or failure of what happens in the organization. And what that really translates to is it's the decisions that get made. So what they don't want to have is decisions that are made that are out of alignment with their objectives, with their strategic objectives. And if we stick with the example of saying, let's say an organization has an ISO rating and they want to maintain that, well, they're going to have to make sure that the necessary decisions throughout the organization that it might impact their ISO rating is going to be made in alignment with the strategy necessary to preserve and protect that international standard. So part of corporate governance is going to be things like making sure they have a framework for strategic decision making that says, well, as we make decisions, this department, this division, this operation is going to have to make decisions that protects our ISO rating. And it's the same thing as when they would say, well, it's going to protect our license to operate in this environment. It's going to protect other things like a commercial agreement that we might have with another organization. And we need to make sure that the decision making that goes on at all levels of our organization preserves and protects that. And this is part of what is going to translate into portfolio and program management. Because as part of making the decisions, what we do when we put a framework around decision making, we are able to create expectations of how those decisions will or won't work. So the point about saying we're going to have a framework of decision making that protects our ISO rating means that we can have and manage the expectations of others, for example, our customers, that says that we will always have this ISO standard and that we will always achieve these minimum standards, or we will always comply with these certain things. So part of the role of this corporate governance is the management of expectations that says we will continue to operate in this way. We will continue to do this to meet these obligations and expectations. And you out there can continue to expect us to do so. And that means you can go ahead and make your decisions, like customers' decisions, customer investment decisions, based on the expectation that we've given you that we will continue to meet these standards. So a customer, for example, that wants to sign a 10-year servicing agreement with our glorious company, and they say, well, you've got ISO ratings now, that's great, but how do I know you're still going to have them in 10 years' time if I'm going to sign a 10-year agreement with you? Well, that's because of our corporate governance. We have got governance in place that ensures that our decision-making is done in such a way that we protect that in the long term. You can therefore predictably invest with us, knowing that it's going to be like that in the future. So this means it's not just relevant to customers. This is relevant to suppliers. This is relevant to shareholders. This is relevant to other parties that we work with. This is relevant to civil groups that we might have to interact with professional bodies that we might have to work with. It's relevant to all of the stakeholders, because all of these stakeholders may have to make decisions of their own with a degree of predictability of, well, how is this organisation going to act into the future? Now, if this organisation is about to embark upon a major growth decision that says, well, we're going to now expand into Asia, or we're going to do this and we're going to do that, well, that's probably going to involve a portfolio of programs, and these programs are going to have many projects, and there's going to be construction, there's going to be R&D, there's going to be all sorts of administrative development, there's going to be lots going on. Now, are all of these portfolios and programs going to be in alignment with our corporate governance? Well, certainly we hope so, but that's the role that governance is going to play and how it's going to translate from the corporate perspective down through portfolio and program management. But at the corporate level, at the organizational level, remember, it's the people that make decisions. It's human beings. And, you know, we're all fallible, we're all unique, we all have our own approach to decision making. And at the corporate governance level, there's this expectation of the behavioral aspects of key decision makers. And this is where we enter into things like integrity, the requirements of integrity in decision making. And integrity often comes out of things like transparency and accountability, etc. And some of this translates down, some of these mechanisms translate down into program and portfolio. Now, you might not have a great deal of discussion at the program level about, let's have a high degree of integrity in our program management. Well, yeah, sure, we'd probably like that. But what we're probably going to talk more about is, well, we're going to have this level of transparency. We're going to have this level of predictability, because we're going to be able to report on and ensure that these things are accountable. These paradigms, these methods of decision making, they're not going to be concealed, they're not going to be hidden, they're not going to be something that somebody could just do quietly and discreetly that no one will ever find out about it. And in that way, we were introducing the mechanisms that would protect behavioral requirements. Louis Gerstner was a fairly famous guy in IBM. He was the chairman and CEO of IBM for around a decade. He took over the company when it was considered to be in a fairly dire situation in the early 1990s. And is largely credited with turning it around and turning it into something that was far more powerful than what it was. His view on governance is that the real mechanism of corporate governance is the active involvement of its owners. And by owners, he's talking about major shareholders. Because one of the key aspects of corporate governance is ensuring that the organization itself is operating, functioning, and making decisions in a way that reflects the joint interests of all of the shareholders, so that the owners, these shareholders, can know that this organization is going to do what it says it's going to do. And we know it's going to do that because these governance mechanisms are in place to make sure and to let us know if it's not, so we can do something about it. But what Lewis is saying here is that if the owners aren't involved, if they're not checking these things, if they're not following up on these things, that's where corporate governance can be less useful, doesn't do its job. So the principles that we're working with, these governance principles are the sorts of things that are going to run right down through portfolio and program governance. These are the things that we are inheriting, and these are the reasons why governance as a concept is applicable in the program and portfolio headspace. So the first is to talk about what governance is trying to do is to remove uncertainty. It's trying to say that how decisions are made, how this portfolio or program will conduct itself is predictable. We're going to have a degree of assurance that says that they will make decisions with certain principles in mind by taking certain things about. There will be a certain degree of transparency. There will be accountability. There will be this, there will be that, there will be something else, because the governance says it will be so. So part of its role is simply making sure. Another part of it is about handling the authority. Governance, by its very nature, is deciding how the authority gets assigned and how authority gets delegated. So it's talking about how things get empowered. And usually that's because governance is setting the conditions of the empowerment. Governance is saying, well, we're going to empower this program to go and do these things. I'm going to empower it by giving it authority over certain resources, including a big fat wad of money and other things like that. And we're going to then put the conditions around that say, well, but you're going to need to make decisions with these things in mind. You're going to need to, at the very least, be working towards the strategic objectives of the organization. Now, that might seem a no-brainer, but it's, strictly speaking, the governance mechanisms, the governance principles that actually make that true. So governance is shaping the decision-making and how it's accountable. It will determine what is the reporting structure from a program or portfolio back to the organization, the degree of visibility, the degree of detail, the inclusiveness of decision-making. Some decisions, they might say, well, you're going to need to have certain members of the executive involved in these kinds of decisions. But these other kinds of decisions, you can make them by yourself. As a result of this, governance is saying, well, we've got these hopes, we've got these outcomes that we're looking for, and we've got these expectations of what's actually going to happen. So governance is part of the mechanism that is trying to keep these in balance, trying to prevent situations where expectations are unrealistic and far beyond what an outcome could actually achieve. So through all of this, the principle of adherence to certain subscribed expectations means that it's ensuring that when program or portfolio resources and stakeholders, when they accept the authority, when they accept the conditions attached to that, that they adhere to what they've subscribed to. So it's a mechanism that says, well, program manager has agreed to this and has set this and has decided this and has promised this. And there is an adherence mechanism through governance that says, and we're going to make sure. We're going to make sure promises are kept. So in a sense, we're talking about governance as being this practical implementation of an ideal, an ideology, or you could describe it as strategic objectives, strategic goals. You could describe it in any loose, amorphous, high-level terms, but governance is the practical implementation of that. It's the structure, the methods, the systems that say, well, we're going to make that a reality. But it's got to happen within itself. It's something that occurs within the system. So it's the organization that might hand down the requirements, the governance requirements, onto a portfolio or a program. Or the portfolio might hand it down into the program. But it needs to be embraced from within. It needs to be internal to the entire entity. Amir Lahoud was president of Lebanon, and I think for him, as you can imagine, the issue of having things imposed from an external perspective was quite relevant during his term of the presidency of Lebanon. But the point here is he's saying democracy, good governance, modernity cannot be imported or imposed from outside. The principles that an entity, whether it be the larger corporate organization, whether it be the portfolio or the program itself, it can't be imposed from a separate entity, from another organization. So the program isn't going to get its governance principles from some other organization. It's going to get it from the organization that is the sponsor of what it's doing. It's going to get it from what it belongs to. Now, part of this is about a mechanism called the Program Governance Board. I'm going to get into a little bit more detail. I'm going to talk about a mechanism that's specifically intended, in practical terms, to achieve some of this from a program perspective. Program Governance Board. Now, this is a fancy name for what is really a core group of people who are empowered with seeing the governance mechanisms dealt with correctly within a particular program. This is separate from the program manager. Now, at this point, I want to draw a distinction between governance and management, because this is where it starts to get potentially a little bit blurred. Management, strictly speaking, is about the allocation of resources. So some of us have heard definitions of management that try to draw a distinction between management and leadership. So management being the allocation of resources, leadership being social influence for collective outcomes, etc. Different perspective. Governance and management is also different. Governance is also about the how things get done. Management is just looking at, strictly speaking, the allocation of resources. And yes, in a portfolio or a program, there's tons of that. There's lots and lots of allocating of resources. But it's how is that done? With what ideals in mind? With what priorities? With what level of integrity? With what degree of transparency? How are we going to go about that? That is governance. Now, we are going to pause in a few moments for questions. We don't have any as yet. So I just want to encourage and remind everyone who has a few thoughts or questions, throw them up in the questions box, and we'll have a pause to see if there are any in a few minutes. We're going to do that just before our poll at the end of the slide. Okay, so let's talk about the Program Governance Board. What's its job? I mean, we are talking about, as I mentioned, a group of people, a group of key individuals that are given the responsibility for ensuring that governance functions correctly inside a particular program. So this means that what they're there to do is to interpret and define how the program's strategic vision meets its goals. So we've talked about programs being something that delivers strategic benefits, strategic outcomes, which are components in the strategic plan of the overall organization. But the role of interpreting and defining how that strategic vision inside the program is actually going to meet the objectives of the larger organization, this is part of what the governance board is here to do. It's here to say, well, if we did this and we did this and we did that, then that would achieve the goal of the organization. So, for example, we want to expand into Asia. So if we had, we need some increase our local manufacturing capability because it would be much more cost effective than shipping everything from somewhere else. We're going to have to localize our branding strategy because we're entering into different cultures that are going to perceive our brand differently. So we're going to have a project for that. We're going to have a project for this. We're going to have a different sales campaign. We're going to have to do all these things. And we're putting these things together because we're interpreting and defining the strategic vision of saying, let's enter the market and let's dominate the market. Let's aim high, shall we? So the governance board is saying, well, there's various components that could or would be included as part of this program. The governance board is going to be approving those or not. It's going to be endorsing those that are appropriate. It's going to be authorizing them in the sense of saying, well, this project to build this factory here, we're going to authorize that simply by saying, well, it's going to have access to the resources it needs. This means that the governance board is in control and in charge of funding. And we talk about phase gates as funding phase gates. So providing the money is not a once-off decision. Yes, there is significant initial funding decisions that say, well, look, are we going to invest in this or not? And we're talking about individual components to this particular program. So the governance board will be making decisions about funding and phase gates. They'll be saying, well, this particular component project can receive its initial funding, and at every key phase gate along the way, they'll be saying, well, yes, let's provide more money, yes, it's going okay, or not, as the case may be. Now, to do all of this, to make all of these decisions, and to manage all of these activities, It means that the governance board has to be responsible for creating the program governance plan. Now, in project and program management speak, that's basically saying you have a plan to do the thing you're going to do. You always begin with a plan. It's a fairly broad and complex set of activities that this governance board is going to be doing. It also means that the governance board is going to have to be on top of everything. It's going to have to be up to date. So the governance board is going to be making decisions about what kind of reporting is necessary. How are we going to review the activities? How are we going to review how well things are progressing towards the delivery of those benefits? That means what kind of communication do we need in order to achieve those things? Now you can see where if you were thinking about this at a project level, you wouldn't be thinking about as much of this in terms of governance. You might be thinking about some of these as being management. But in a project level, you've got things like a steering committee, for example, where the project manager is saying, well, the project manager might have some say over what goes on in terms of reporting and review, but still is going to have to meet a reporting requirement upstream. They're going to have to meet a review and revision requirement from upstream. That's going to be dictated by the governance decisions that are made at the higher level, at the program level. The Program Governance Board is also going to be determining things such as quality standards. How are these benefits going to be realized? What do we consider an adequate benefit? How do we measure that? What are the standards of completion and success? How do we know that a particular component project has delivered what's necessary for that component to meet the overall strategic goals and objectives? Governance is going to be determining those thresholds. But these people are just people. You know, I'm kind of talking about the governance board as being these all-powerful, almighty individuals, but they're just human beings. And this is something, this is one of my favorite points made by, those of you who are Star Trek fans will know who Patrick Stewart is. Those of you who might have bounced off Star Trek and gone in another direction, you'll know about Star Trek. And Jean-Luc Picard is the captain of the Starship Enterprise. And one of his most famous comments about filming on the set is that on 2 occasions they had Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff attending the set. And both of those people asked his permission before they sat in the captain's chair. So governance and what's in charge, who's in charge, how do we do things, this is a matter of perspective. And this is a demonstration of 2 things. It's a demonstration of why we have things structured the way we do, to prevent the application of personal interpretation of what should be done. But when it is actually institutionalized, and no, there's no written rule that says that when you're on the set with the actors that the actor who plays the character who would be in control of that chair should make the decision of who sits in it. But it's become an unwritten institution that is a point of authority. It is something we need to adhere to. It is a governance structure of that environment, the bridge of that, set, the starship. And so people who would normally consider themselves perhaps above that would still adhere to that because it is enshrined in the principles of governance in that environment. Now before we throw out an opinion poll for you guys to comment on, I just want to ask and see, has anyone got any questions? We normally set aside a few minutes for questions, and we normally have a few, but we haven't as yet. So I'll pause for a moment just to let you throw up any questions that you might have. If you don't, that's okay. We can save them. You can throw them up a little bit later. This is the poll that I'm going to give you in just a moment. It's just to give you an idea, an opportunity to share your opinion of how your organization currently views the role of governance. And when you answer this question, you know, it could be governance as I've defined it and as I've sort of tried to explain it, or it could be governance as your organization believes or perceives it to be, which might be somewhat slightly different. All right, let's throw this poll. See, here we go. Here we go. Keep thinking about your questions as we go through this. And we'll wait till we get to a sufficient percentage and then we'll share that poll. I know a lot of people that I've spoken to in the corporate arena often view governance as an obstacle. They view it as a restriction. They view it as something that gets in their way a lot. They view it often as something that is hampering. And in practical terms, that's often the case. But the overlooked aspect of this is that often that's exactly what's needed. A set of guiding principles that guides the individualism, the individual decision-making input, and focuses it on particular goals and objectives is precisely what governance is there to try and do at the strategic level. It's to prevent diversity of input from becoming damaging and problematic. It's to encourage diversity of input to follow particular strategic goals and particular methods of working towards those goals. Now, we're up to 60-odd%. I want to see if we can get up to, we usually get up to around 3/4, so I just want to give it another moment to see if a few other people can jump in there and click, and then we'll share the results and have a little bit of a chat about it. After this, we're going to have a bit more of a talk specifically about portfolio governance, and we'll talk a bit about the Project Management Institute perspective on governance and go into those details, and then we'll switch over to Philip shortly after that. All right, so we're above 70% now, so I will close the poll and share it, and we'll talk a little bit about the results. Okay, can you guys actually see that? I'm seeing something different on my audience view here. Are you guys actually seeing the results of the poll up there? Can someone let me know?
Yeah, right. I'm seeing it on my end as well.
Oh, excellent. Okay, good, because it's showing me something different. All right. So here's some results. We see only the smaller percentage of people saying that governance is too often the furthest thing from their mind. Too busy with other things. And look, some organizations are smaller. They're at stages of their development where it's far more formative, where they're still busy building and doing. And governance isn't top of mind in some organizations. And sometimes that's okay at certain stages. Then there's others who say that, there's lip service paid to governance, where it's talked about as a good thing or something we should have, or maybe something we think we have, but we're not too sure. These are situations where governance is often used as a tick box. It's often said, well, this is the compliance side of governance. This is where we say, well, the organization, as an organization, has met its compliance obligations. We're legal. We're right. We're okay. We're not in trouble. But that's as far as governance might go for those organizations. If that's the case, then those organizations will be more likely to struggle with their ability to create strategic alignment with what would otherwise be the disparate things that would be going on. So the investment of energy and effort within those organizations is going to have a harder time meeting the most strategic goals. Then you've got those that have 21% have said governance plays a part. And this is sort of the typical average organization where, yeah, it's there and we think about it and we like to do things with it. But it's really only just playing some minor role. Now, the majority of you, or about a third, have said that, yeah, governance is happening. It's not always what we hoped it would be. It's not always useful. And, there might be some percentage of that where governance is actually functioning as intended. It might actually be doing its job, but in doing its job, it might be making our job a little harder. That can certainly happen. And certainly those of you who are involved in program, portfolio, or even project management will be well familiar with this idea that, you know, sometimes governance, when it's really working, is actually a bit of a pain for us at times. But strategically, if it is working well, it is helping us to work towards meeting the strategic goals. And this is where we get to the final 20%, which is actually a fairly healthy percentage statistically of organizations or of, you know, people like yourselves who feel that their organization is using governance effectively. Now, one of the biggest differences between the 34% and the 20% is often to do with a greater level of awareness of how much the governance that is in place in the organization actually fulfills its requirements. Some organizations make that a little hard for you to figure out. It's not real clear that all the governance that's there is actually doing its job and what job it's meant to do. They don't necessarily provide enough of that information to people like us that says, well, I can now be clear on exactly what this governance is doing for our company. And often when they are clear and when that is more obvious, we can feel more confident that the governance we are enduring or subjected to in some ways is actually achieving something. There's a comment here from Robert saying that he says, I find the challenge with program governance is for the governance board to operate at the right level and not dive down into the details of a specific project. Robert, I would agree that is, in my view, the #1 challenge and problem with the governance board is because they see themselves as too much of program management. And as you've pointed out, all the way down to project management. And this is why trying to have a really clear picture of what the governance board is really meant to be doing is hopeful that it will enable it to not do what it shouldn't be doing. Because what the governance board should not be doing is the allocation of resources. Because that's a management function. And that's what should happen at the program management and project management levels. So governance board should be thinking a lot about how things get done, what standards of reporting, what standards of ethical decision making and all that sort of thing. But that doesn't mean they actually make all the decisions on a day-to-day basis. Now, this can sometimes happen because of the way in which the governance board is created. It can also happen, I've seen it happen where the governance board is created far too early, long before program and project managers are in place, and so a habit of functionality occurs where the governance board is fulfilling too many functions and too many roles in the beginning and doesn't relinquish those as effectively as those roles are fulfilled later on. Anna's asking the questions, should the government board approve expenditure of funds? To a certain extent, at a certain level, yes. But what the governance board should be doing is saying that we approve the expenditure of this amount of funds for these particular outcomes. Now, they will then decide the degree of flexibility that goes along with that obligation and that money. They might say, well, we just want something done that achieves this goal, and program and project management can figure that out because that's their job. Or they might say, well, look, no, because of our particular agreement with this particular national government, we want you to put our factory there. Why? Because head office has signed a deal with this particular, department or this particular minister, and that's how it's got to be. So, I mean, Garo is just pointing out, where did the NBN people go wrong, or the federal government with the NBN? Well, NBN is a bit of a can of worms in this regard because it's as much of a political activity as it is a portfolio or a program. So in that regard, it's chock full of lots of other little landmines. But, it makes a great case study to ponder and talk about. But we won't go into it now because I'm sure we'll get lots of highly volatile reactions out of that, which we usually do. All right. let's hide that. We'll talk a bit more about portfolio governance. Okay, so portfolio governance, program governance, yeah, there's a lot of similarities because we've already talked before about the fact that you can sometimes have programs that don't have a portfolio above them. And you can have very light touch portfolio management that's saying, well, look, you know, we're just here to pull some things together. You can even have portfolios that say, well, look, you know, mainly what this portfolio governance or this portfolio management is doing is looking after the orphans, the individual component projects that don't belong to a program. And they put the vast majority or the burden of management onto the program management, and they do relatively little. This sort of thing can happen. And so inevitably you get this overlap where you get some of the governance requirements that need to happen at that strategic level could fall into the portfolio bucket or the program bucket. And I make the point again that this is not about demarcation. This is not about saying, well, this can't happen here and that can't happen here. This is about understanding what happens at either level, and then depending on your particular environment and situation, you'll know that, well, at least as long as it's happening somewhere, you can determine whether or not it's happening well enough. The interesting thing about portfolio governance is that, as we've talked about before, we've talked about what portfolio management is, and you know, I've said or I've suggested that, you know, a technical definition of management is merely allocation of resources, but you know, that runs into contrast of all the things, or conflict with all the things that we've previously said that portfolio management is all about. We've said portfolio management is a very strategic perspective. It's about making sure that billions of activity that goes on, lots and lots of little things that happen, all add up to something that's really useful for the company. Now that's a hugely strategic perspective. It doesn't really gel with the idea of management of things, but it really does gel with the idea of governance of things. So yeah, you could be forgiven for thinking, well, hang on, maybe we should just call this portfolio governance and not call it portfolio management. Some of these terms have been in use for far too long for that sort of thing to happen. So what we do instead is we say, well, okay, now we'll still call it portfolio management. But what we're going to do is we're going to wrap all these governance activities so deeply entwined into it that you can't really separate them and you can't really pull them apart. So the governance of a portfolio is saying, well, we're going to define what the portfolio really is. We're going to define its existence. And when we're happy with defining what it is, we're going to authorize it. And then we're going to make sure it's successful. Now, you could describe that as a management function at a lower level, but here we talk about it as governance because it's closely linked to what's going on at the governance level of the corporation above it. So it forms this kind of boundary between these high and lofty strategic goals and all the actions way down at the bottom that need to happen for those strategic goals to be met. And the portfolio can't tell you how to do it, but the portfolio can say within what structure, within what reporting paradigm, within what empowerment paradigm, within what kind of funding paradigm. Here's another simplistic way of trying to say this. Portfolio governance is the simplification of decision-making through the application of strategic expertise. This is trying to be a powerful statement here. Let's see if it works. Simplification of decision-making is a way of saying we don't want decision-making or decision-making methods that are not conducive to the strategic outcomes. We're simplifying it because we want the decision-making to be aligned. We want it to be supportive of the strategic goals. We don't want it to be unnecessarily complex. We do that through the application of strategic expertise. Now, what is strategic expertise? It is knowledge and understanding of what is the strategy. What are the strategic limitations? What are the strategic ambitions? What is in the minds at the corporate organization level? What are the decisions at that level? And then how do we apply that to simplify all the things that need to happen at the next level down, at the portfolio level? It reminds me of a comment made by Edward de Bono, and he's made most famous as by the originator of the concept of lateral thinking. He says that an expert is someone who has succeeded in making decisions and judgments simpler through knowing what to pay attention to and what to ignore. And it is exactly the same in this concept. What governance is trying to do is to simplify decision-making and judgments by knowing what it is we should be thinking about, what it is we should be focusing on, why we're focusing on it, how we're going to focus on it this way, and allowing us through that process to ignore lots of other things. Anna's asking the question, wouldn't you say, quote, framework for making decisions? Absolutely. And, you know, that is exactly another way you could have said this, a framework for making decisions. Kind of trying to restate it in other ways to give it all sorts of, let you sort of look at it from different angles. But I would agree, that is another accurate way of describing what this is all about. Let's have a look for a minute at what the Project Management Institute talks about when it talks about portfolio of governance, rather. So PMI, we know who the PMI is. We know that, you know, we've got some suggested reading of various books, etc., to do with this. And this is what this particular major course is based on. So let's get some insight out of what the PMI is saying that portfolio governance is all about. Here's a short list. These are processes that exist in the body of knowledge, the portfolio body of knowledge, that the Program Management Institute says are contained within portfolio governance. Top of the list, develop the portfolio management plan. Now, those of you who've had some familiarity with project management and the PMI's project management body of knowledge would know that when you talk about developing the project management plan, you're talking about the master plan. In the project sense, the project management plan is the plan of plans, the plan that plans everything else, the one plan to bind them all. Well, in portfolio, it's much the same. So what we're saying here is that portfolio, we're saying governance is the ultimate level of responsibility to develop the plan of how the portfolio is going to do pretty much everything else. And as you can see on the list here, the processes that we then do is we then define the portfolio, which we've already alluded to before. It's defining what is the portfolio there to do. Then we look at optimizing it. Now, when we look at optimizing the portfolio, again, we're looking at it from the perspective of what is the organizational objectives, what is the strategy, what are we trying to do at the end game for the organization, what component projects should exist in this, and how should they exist? Should we build a factory here? Should we build this? Should we do that? Should we create this? Optimizing the portfolio has a lot to do with saying, well, this is in, this is good, this is contributing. We can authorize this, but this other thing over here that we thought was useful or that somebody thought was useful, no, that's not appropriate. It's not going to meet our requirements. It's not within keeping. It's not within this. It's not within that. No, we're not going to authorize that. And providing the oversight is about all of the activities necessary to make sure that all of this remains continually accurate and relevant, not just initially accurate and relevant. So as we optimize the portfolio moving forward, we might say, well, look, hang on, this factory here, you know, we're having sorts of issues, we're having dramas, the political landscape has changed. Maybe we should make that factory half the size and make this other one over here twice as big, and we'll meet our output requirements, we'll meet our manufacturing requirements that way. You know, but we'll also meet the newly developed strategic imperative that says that we've now signed this cozy agreement with this other minister for this other country, so let's now work with that. Portfolio governance is the mechanism that's required to ensure that that is carried out down the stream. You know, that could mean that some poor project manager somewhere has just had their project cancelled or, you know, cut in half. Stuff like that happens because portfolio governance has got bigger things to worry about. And they have decided that, yeah, sure, at the project level, it's an enormous waste of money. But not doing that might waste even more. And that's a perspective that that project manager just can't see. They just don't have the visibility to those facts to make those kind of judgments. Here's something that I thought was a very interesting comment from a very interesting person. Someone who was previously ex-premier of China, People's Republic of China. He said it's only when there is critical oversight from the people that the government will be in a position to do an even better job. So the point here, and if we take this out of its political context and say, well, it's only when there is critical oversight from the people involved that the mechanism at large will be able to do an even better job. So only when there is oversight of the entire portfolio will the entire portfolio be in a position to deliver its best and ultimate outcomes and results. Now, the way in which we get oversight from the people involved is to ensure that the people involved are all sufficiently familiar and aware and up to speed with what is the governance requirements. That they will then be able to contribute collectively, broadly. It's not always entirely up to a single small governance board to have all the information and make all the decisions. They will be able to decide that actually some of these decisions need to be distributive. Some of these decisions need to be inclusive. Because we need to be able to take in input, feedback, and contribution from broader sources. So let's try and summarize for a moment. What is governance? We'll stick a stake in the sand and try and call that interesting. Before we do that, I just want to answer a question from Garo saying, not clear on that, how can critical oversight create a better outcome? It's about checks and balances. It's about an ability to have an awareness of misalignment. So if you have a strategic goal at the highest level that says, well, this strategic goal will be defined in very broad and loose terms, and then each layer down, that definition of what that strategic goal actually translates to becomes more and more refined, more and more defined, more and more granular, more and more detailed, more and more accurate as you get further down in the hierarchy and in the structure. So a critical oversight is where we're saying, well, is this still true to the next layer up? You know, we're doing this at this layer, this level of detail, this level of granularity. Is it still true to the objectives held at the next layer up? We're building this factory here in this location. Is it still true to the ideals as a region that says that as a region we need a particular level of manufacturing capacity? Well, we might think it is, but what happens when another factory in another country that's meant to be built at the same time, for some reason the deal to acquire the land that they're going to build it on falls through, there's a falling out with various people, they can't make it that big, they have to make the factory half the size. Our little project over here is happily building the factory that we always thought was going to be necessary. Without critical oversight, we're not going to have the opportunity as a portfolio, as a program, to say, well, hang on, this is not going to meet requirements. If we don't react to this fact, then the entire program is going to fail to meet the construction, the manufacturing requirements that this entire region is going to need. We're going to need to make a change over here, and this factory is now going to have to be double what we originally planned it to be. That would not have been possible without critical oversight. So the better outcome is to say that when you have critical oversight, you have an opportunity to know, perceive, react to, and make new decisions about anything that's going wrong. But that critical oversight has to happen at a sufficient altitude to be able to see this is a problem over here and it's going to have an impact over there. It's governance that determines the flow of analysis and the flow of information to make sure that the decision makers that do have visibility across all of this sort of stuff have the opportunity and the information necessary that comes back to them that says, well, hang on, all this information means we've got to make a new decision. And once we've made a new decision, that's got to filter down to a range of changes to decisions elsewhere downstream. I'm hoping that sort of elaborated a little bit on that question. Let me know if we can elaborate on that further, and we'll go over it. So, what is governance? I'm going to try and throw a few short answers to this, given what we've talked about and in the context that we've been using it here. Governance is, in one sense, it's the application of a strategic intent, a strategic goal, a strategic ambition. It is the application of that ambition. It's not just saying, well, you know, we're going to do these great things and we're going to feel good about the fact that we've said we're going to do these great things, but how do we apply ourselves to that? Governance helps us to do that. When we do that in a structured manner, we can take away uncertainty. We can create predictability from our application of effort. We can say, well, our structure of governance says that if we invest in these things in this way, we'll have a better chance of achieving these goals. And if we do it chaotically and randomly and what everyone thinks should be done on any given day, we've probably got less chance of achieving that strategic intent. So governance, yes, it's the application of the intention, but it's also increasing our predictability by removing the uncertainty from that application. Once we've been able to create this certainty, this predictability, it says, well, we're going to authorize that. Governance says, here is the money. You are empowered. You are approved. And not just approved right now. We're going to consistently ensure that you receive the support necessary until completion. This isn't a one-off deal. We're here for the long term. We're here to make sure, not just now, but right up until the end. How do we make sure that things are consistent? How do we make sure that we consistently are delivering results that contribute towards the ultimate goal? Well, by having a framework for decision making, just as Anna suggested a few moments ago. By having a framework for the decision making that supports the consistency towards the ongoing accumulation of value for the final objective. So to bring it all full circle, governance is about the realization of the benefits, like enjoying the benefits, getting the benefits, the final outcome, the achievement of the strategic intent via the structured decision making, the billions of decisions that were conducted in such a structured manner that they actually did what we said we were going to do. Tony Robbins once said, stay committed to your decisions, but be flexible in your approach. This is part of what governance does for organizations. We've got a strategic intent. We're going to stay committed to that, but we might need to be flexible at how we go about it. But how do we be flexible and still actually remain committed to our decision? We follow a framework that is constantly got our eye on the prize and is constantly adjusting how we're going about it to make sure that we're moving closer and closer towards it. Now, in a moment, I'm going to hand over the mouse and keyboard to Philip. I just want to see if there's any new questions that have come in. We don't have any at the moment. Does anyone give a moment to see if anyone's typing furiously and wants to throw up a question? Just before I hand over to Philip and let him have a chat about governance controls. So I'm going to change screens and slides. We don't seem to have any questions. Philip, are you right to kick off with your part of this discussion?
Yeah, sure.
All right.
Okay, can everyone hear me okay?
We can hear you? Yes.
Good.
Let me now
good.
give you the control.
0.6 is great. Thank you.
Give keyboard and mouse. And I'm going to go mute. Over to you, Philip.
Fantastic, thank you. Always a hard act to follow, isn't it? Gara, I'm just looking at your comment there. Point 6 is great. I think I must have paid you for that, because that was going to be my segue into my set of discussions. Because what point 6 was, which was in the previous slide, it's talking about the realization of benefits from the decisions. So as I guess you've picked up over the last few weeks, I focus on benefits and I focus on value, and I talk about the differences between benefits and value and the various value drivers. So once again, that's what I'll be talking about, and once again I'm getting my inspiration, or I guess the framework of my discussion, from Totally Optimized Projects. So I want to acknowledge their IP in this. Now, I'm sure you will remember, but on the third slide that Brenton had today, he talked about program governance, and that was really all about aligning the value with the benefits. So it all links in quite nicely. One thing that I wanted to touch on, linked into one of the other earlier questions as well, was talking about governance and project managers. One of the things that I think I will also repeat in my little session is that it's the project manager or program manager that manages the project or program, but it's the governance team that manage the value, and they are the ones that must track its progress for delivery. We're all talking about value. So once again, I'm talking about controls. These are more the business governance controls, or the levers, or the things that people perhaps should be interested in, and some of the questions that perhaps people should ask with respect to governance. So this links in nicely from the last two sessions, which were program controls and portfolio management controls. So let's go. There are 6 of them, and once again, as I did last week, I'll go through each one in turn. So at a high level, what are the 6 control areas or areas of focus, and the sort of things we need to look for? The first one, as with any program or project, is the scope. So what we really want to understand is what's in, what's out of scope, and how does it optimize the value? So the things that are in and out of scope, how do they optimize value? The next thing I want to talk through tonight is value maximization. So all the potential value. Have we really understood all the value that this particular program or project can do for us? And I'll give you some points and questions in each of these, of course. And then, so once we've maximized the value, then how do we actually optimize it? So how do we optimize the value? So there may be some things that will give us some value, but is it worthwhile chasing? So that's when we start now getting into optimization. So we're starting with a broad thought process, and we're narrowing it down and start to focus in the next steps, which are dealing with the viability. So is this particular project or program, is it viable? Should we continue? Is it still relevant? And these are some of the aspects that are typically discussed or should be discussed at a program level. Then the last one here, or the second last one, is value delivery. Are we actually delivering them? Are we getting full value from the benefits? Now, and of course to do that, of course, we need to measure the value. So part of the program manager's role that reports through to the governance committee, and they do the ongoing work, is how we're actually tracking and measuring the delivery of each of those benefits. So we talked a little bit about that in more detail last week. Gabby asked me to turn up the volume. Is that better? I think it was more I just had my head on the side. Sorry, I was looking at something as I was talking. Hopefully that's okay. All right, so let's go through all of these 6 one at a time, and try and get a deeper understanding of them. So scope management. So as you're aware, scope, we're really referring here to things like processes, outcomes, geographical area, products, policies, systems, technologies, what have you. We're talking about a range of activities in scope. One of the things that you do cover in the project and program management courses here is talking about how do you control scope and how do you manage it. If you don't control it properly, if the scope starts to creep or increase, what can happen there is the value will actually decrease. The value of the project will decrease because we're adding too many things and we're trying to deliver too many things. We don't know where we are. The other thing of interest, if you start cutting some scope, and that happens sometimes with projects or programs of work when we're starting to run out of time or things have changed and we want to speed it up, or we're having some technical issues and we want to take something out. It always sounds good from a delivery perspective, it always sounds good from a schedule perspective and also from a cost and resourcing perspective, but do we know what that's going to do to the value? So if we're cutting some things out, what's the impact on the value? These are the sorts of questions and focus that the governance body needs to have with respect to scope management. So let's start talking about it a little bit more. One of the things that I said is you start wide and go narrow. What I've seen that works really well is this. People tend to, when they start thinking about a program or start thinking about how do we fix this solution, or thinking about how do we actually deliver on this strategy that we've got in the organisation, they tend to narrow their scope down too early. So what we've got to try and do, and the governance group should help do this, is to look at the broad or the opportunity scope and really try and work out where the value is, and probably just as importantly where the value is not. So we try and broaden it out. Are we just talking about Australia, or are we just talking about accounts payable? Well, let's think through things and go as broad as we possibly can first. Then the next thing we do under this guise of governance for delivering the value, we then focus on what solution we're going to do and target the areas of greatest value. So what's our best bang for bucks? Now to do that, of course, we need to understand the value. And if I can just repeat from some of the previous sessions, I said we work from desired outcomes, and each desired outcome, which is an end state and a business statement of what it will be like when we're finished, they have an associated set of benefits. Those benefits are also written in business terms, and a dollar value can be derived from each of those benefits, and that dollar value is dependent on the value drivers. For example, changes in throughput, or changes to the exchange rate, or changes in headcount, or changes in customer base. They're all variables or value drivers for the value that's associated with each of the benefits, and each benefit is associated to a desired outcome. So that's how it all links together, just to refresh your memory on that. Sorry, I'm just trying to go. It's just a little bit slow. There's a lag here, so bear with me. And once we've actually worked out what's the solution, how we're going to get the best value, then we need to really start protecting this particular scope. And we do that through our typical change management and change control activities. So when we're doing change management and doing change control, and specifically with scope, we need to make sure that every decision that we make, we understand the impact on delivering the value. So they're the key issues that I wanted to talk about in scope management with respect to governance of a program of work. And let's flip across now to the next one, which is value maximisation. The key here is working out where's our best bang for bucks. Now, what tends to happen in business cases is people work through and they say, okay, this is what we're doing, these are the benefits that we're going to get, and as soon as they sort of get enough benefits to justify the project, they stop. The trap with that is you may miss a lot of benefits, you may miss a lot of value, and it's linked again a little bit to the scope statement, but it's the process of drilling down on the benefits that we want to talk through here at the moment. So what some of the key things we need to understand with this, and it's have all the available benefits. So how do we know what the available benefits are? How many of them are there? We're not thinking at this stage whether they're worthwhile to do or not. It's just what is the value of the benefits and the associated value that we can get. That's the maximisation of it. What we're trying to say in this particular thing, it's not to find enough to justify it, but to get all of them, to get the best bang for bucks as we work through, as I've said before. The key here is to maximise, find as many benefits and associated value as possible. Then, of course, we optimise as we go through. One thing we don't do is compromise. In other words, we don't compromise the value, we don't compromise our analysis of these particular benefits. The issue here that I put, and I'd spoken about it earlier, is the differences between benefits and value. I hope we can sort of all understand that. There's a typical example that I use, and let's just say we've got a little business unit, and we're running an operational budget, and what we've found is our printer costs are just absolutely ridiculous, and if we put all of our printers through to one particular supplier, get a maintenance contract with that supplier, then our analysis has showed us that from a value perspective, we'll certainly get a 10% saving on our operational budget. So some of the benefits are simplification of single provider, one-stop shop, those sorts of areas. But then what's the value? How do you associate the value? What happens if the numbers of people in the organisation change? We're not going to get a 10% reduction in our operating budget. What happens if all of a sudden there's other groups that come in and start using our printers? And if we're trying to track the benefits, well, we've lost it. We need to understand and track in these instances the value drivers and the changes of the assumptions. So if our operating budget saving goes to 3%, that in fact may be very good. Just a concept there that I wanted to think through. Okay, now let's start talking about the optimization. So we've maximized, so we've found as many of these particular benefits and associated values as possible. What are we going to do? How do we optimize? The key part in this is not all of them are worth delivering. It's just not worth it. These are things that can be done. It's not worth delivering. It could be for a number of reasons. It could be the cost associated with it delivering. It could be associated with, excuse me, I'll just pull down the other two here. It could be associated with the amount of effort required or the timing to get that particular thing. The goal on this particular program, for example, may be speed to market. So yes, if we spend a bit more time and put a bit more quality, we can certainly derive some more benefits. But no, we're going to stop it here and we start slowing it down. That links to the scope. Remember, we talked about the scope maximization down the solution. Same with the benefits, getting all our benefits and then bring it down to optimize. So these are some of the things that we need to talk through. And then we start looking at all the benefits in the program of work that we're doing, and we start linking those together. So this is part of the process, and it's quite a detailed process of value optimization. So do we know what our optimal value is for doing this particular piece of work or investing in this particular piece of work? This viability assessment is just so powerful, so strong. One of the things that happen a lot with projects and programs is people keep thinking if we throw more money at it, if we continue it on, if we re-baseline this particular project with respect to schedule and budget, then it will be okay, we'll work through it. But do people actually assess the impact on the value? And I know we spoke about this in a couple of weeks ago as well. What's the impact on delays? Every dollar. What's the impact on every dollar or $100 or in some projects millions of dollars spent? Does that actually dilute the whole project? And there's a common expression that some projects are doomed to completion. In other words, we just keep going, get it over and done with and then move on. But perhaps it may have been smarter to stop that project as we go through. So the concept here from a governance perspective is we need to assess the viability from time to time to make sure that it's still worthwhile. And what do we look at? So we start looking at the costs and the values and the value drivers. And as I said, we don't put it through to be condemned to completion. Now, has the strategy changed? Because some of these programs of work could be 2 years and the strategy may have already changed. Is it still relevant? So it just takes a bit of a delay here. And then final, and these are very simple things, is it worthwhile doing? So one of the things that, well, many things, but the governance group, because they're there to get the value, is they need to do it and they need to put their reputations on the line to say yes or no, is this worthwhile continuing with this project? And it's a very hard decision to make. because people think, well, hang on, we put all this wonderful business case and we did all this analysis and it made perfect sense and the board signed off. You know, we'd look like fools if we went back to the board and said, no, we've stopped this project. Well, probably that's not quite true. If we say why this particular project needs to be stopped or changed or create a totally different one, we're certainly in a much better position. I remember when I very first started learning about project management and program management, and specifically when it comes to reporting, one of my very early mentors used to always have on the monthly report that they did, is this project still worthwhile? And I kept asking, I said, why do you even bother asking that particular question? We're here as project managers to deliver. And he said, yes, but to deliver what and to what value? So this was many, many years ago, and it's still relevant today. So I wanted to pass that particular piece of wisdom that I picked up a long time ago. All right, the second last one we wanted to talk through now is looking at the value delivery. So when we're in project land, we're starting to deliver. So the first question that governance groups need to be able to address is, has it been set up, oh, typo, to deliver the value proposition? As we said, the project manager manages the project, the governance team manages the value. So are we set up to actually do that? How are we going to do it? What's the governance and reporting style? What are the decision-making processes involved in this? And how do we even know what the value is? The next thing that you need to be able to answer from, if you're in a governance group, is, are you on track and schedule? This must have, sorry guys, I think I sent through an older version. There's some typos on this page which I picked up before. Let's see if we can find the typos. But so this means, you know, do we actually know what the schedule is? Do we know how we're going to deliver? Now, has anything changed? We should, and one point in the second one is we should plan to deliver value. So when you're structuring a program of work, where can you start getting value? When can you start banking some dollars? Because it certainly helps when you get into the high-risk projects. You try and tackle the risky bits first and you try and get some value straight away. A simple example of that could be when you're redoing some processes or simplifying processes or optimizing processes so that they can then be embedded perhaps into a technological platform, you can already bank on the process changes. So already people are starting to use things and start thinking about things differently and starting to add value. You can measure that and start banking it as you go through. Some of the typos are being picked up in the notes here, which is good, so I do apologize for that. All right. So we're talking about tracking and everything else, but of course you can't do anything unless you can measure it. You know, you need to be able to measure. And there's a very common saying, which is what gets measured is what gets managed. So, do we know what the available value is? Is that particular value being delivered? So we can only answer that by measuring. And quite often people talk about it as value or benefits realization. Well, it's really value realization, and you're starting to track the value, track the drivers as we go through. Now there will be some variances. So from a governance perspective, can we explain why? Is it because of the fluctuating dollar? Is it because our workforce has just dropped by 10%? Is it because we've taken on a new company and and our workforce has increased? So these are some of the variables that would be linked to the value of a program that you're working on. And then we start, and most importantly, when we're thinking through this, if there are some changes, what remedial action can we take to recover lost value? And I always like to put on the end of that, what remedial action can we take right now to recover lost value? It's got to be fast. You've got to do something, and then that may spawn other projects or programs. So let's sort of summarize this at the moment, because this is value. So where did we start on this? We started talking about at the scope stage. Then we started talking about benefits identification. Think big, come down to small. And we were talking about have we optimized our benefits and value? Do we know where we are? Are we able to track them and measure them? Now, quite often, the project will have stopped. The project manager or program manager will have moved on to another area at this stage. Part of their closure should be to make sure that it's very clear who's accountable to continually measure this value. Someone that understands the drivers and can report back on it and justify the investment. Quite often, once a project's finished, there may be some lip service to what people commonly refer to as benefits realisation, but that's pretty much all it is. But as I'm saying, it's more than the benefits, it's the value associated with those benefits and understanding the value drivers and the variability of those value drivers with the benefits. So that's where I'd like to stop now. I'll move down to questions. Most of it's dealing with my typos. I was deliberate, of course. I did discover them on Sunday, but I must have sent the wrong version back to Brenton, so sorry about that.
It's also possible, folks, just to support Philip, it might have been my mistake. I may have actually put the wrong slides in, not the ones you corrected. But look, for the record, Philip did correct all these slides. So I do apologise if I've contributed to that. I'm sorry about that.
Keeps people on their toes.
Yes. So we have got some few minutes left for any questions that anyone has with any of the things that we've just covered, the things that Phil has just covered, or what we've talked about before that. Gareth is pointing out your point, Philip. Very good point to repeat. What gets measured is what gets valued.
Absolutely, and quite often, you know yourself, when you've got some SLAs or KPIs, they're the ones that you manage too. And so the trick is to make sure you've got the right performance measures, or we've got the right measurements and approaches to measure and to understand what happens with the value. So quite often when I'm talking with people on the subject of value is understanding what's good and what's bad. If it's starting to trend, is that actually a good trend? Do we understand it? Even if the trend line's going down, it may in fact be a good sign. So it's really understanding the mathematics behind it. But yes, I agree with you, Gara. You do need to measure. I forget where that statement came from, but it's certainly an old statement that's used a lot, and it's quite true.
Well, let's see if we can draw a line under it. Thanks for all that, Philip. Thanks for that excellent insights on governance controls. Just see if we get any last-minute questions. We'll just try and pull a summary of our understanding together of what we've talked about in this presentation today. We've talked about governance as fairly altruistic, but it's all about trying to ensure outcomes, not hope and guess and maybe we get there, but making sure that we actually do, and preparing and managing everything to make sure that we deal with everything along the way. And that these programs and portfolios that are integral to delivering the change that takes us on a journey from where we are today to where we want to be with our strategic goals, governance is highly integral to everything that's going on within programs and portfolios, far more so than you would typically find at the project level. And it provides this framework for decision making, and exactly as Anna mentioned earlier, that exact phrase, a framework for decision making and for managing the empowerment that the programs and portfolios are given. So they're empowered to bring about change, and that's not a small thing. Change is big, change is scary, change is risk, and governance is the big thing that helps us make sure that we minimize the risk and we maximize the benefits. And as Philip has pointed out, we maximize the value. So governance controls, they're about all the things that we need to do to make sure that it's not just about change for change's sake, it's not just about strategy for strategy's sake, it's about the value that all of that ultimately brings. Because the high ideals that were talked about at the strategic level long ago, at the end of the program, at the end of the portfolio, it's going to be judged based on how that has been translated into some kind of value. One of the things, a last point I want to make, the last quote I want to throw out to you guys is something from Marcel Proust, who's quite a well-known French novelist. His point of view was that all of our final decisions are made in a state of mind that is not going to last. It is the nature of the human condition that all states of mind are temporary. So the conditions under which any decision is made is going to be unique to that individual, and it's going to be temporary to that moment in time. And we always need mechanisms for collective decision making to work towards common goals, and for decisions made over periods of time to work towards common goals. And so the role of governance in decision making for programs and portfolios, given that they do tend to occur over long periods of time and require a lot of decisions, is a way of dealing with this very point that Marcel is saying, that it is human nature to be highly subjective in our decision making. But the organization has to be objective in how it delivers value from its strategic objectives. So that's all we had for everyone. 4 sessions. Hopefully you've all found interesting stuff out of some of them. This one will be uploaded. They'll all be there. It's all stuff that you're going to be able to have a look at and hopefully fill your head with knowledge before the exam next week. Anyone's got any last-minute questions? Of course, you're welcome to keep using the forums. They'll still be attended to until this is all completed. We'll be able to post information when the certificates are sent. And it does take, I didn't mention this, but it does take a couple of weeks after the exam has been released before the certificates are ready. And when they are released, it'll be posted on the forums. So you'll all get to know when the certificate has been emailed to you, and then you can print it out locally. We just got a comment here, a suggestion from Garo saying, after suggestion, perhaps it can be discussed later. Rather than a single big test, have a weekly quiz of 20 questions on the topic covered. Enabling knowledge to be passed on to be reinforced in participants' minds. Far more important to learn the subject than to pass the test, because the real test is in the field. Look, I agree with you, and it's a good suggestion, Garo, and I think it's usually a little better for learning outcomes. The only challenge we have is, do we then provide you with the answers week by week? Because if we do that, we still take enrollments throughout the course, so anyone that joins and enrolls later would then be able to get the answers for the exam that they've already, or the test they've already done, or the quiz they've already done, and therefore would become ineligible for the certificate because they've already got some of the answers. So this is the kind of things that we're juggling and having to deal with. But you make a good suggestion that lots of other people have also made, and we're just trying to work out the best way of incorporating the kinds of things that you're thinking of, with also being able to make it fair for everyone that joins late and still wants to get recognized for it. But yes, as you suggest, we could not give the answers till the end, but make the quiz here and now, so that we're testing you or quizzing you on things that are relevant week by week. So yeah, we will certainly give that a thought. I think that's a valid idea worth considering. And M. Jenkins saying, need to balance life with this online course. Absolutely. With all of these sorts of endeavors, we need to balance things out. All right, Talika saying, great presentation. Thanks for your feedback. There will be an opportunity, as I mentioned, there'll be a survey at some point. If you've got more feedback, we'd love to hear from you then. All right, well, this looks like that's the end. Is there any more comments? No, there doesn't appear to be. All right. Look, thanks for everyone who's chimed in and given us your thoughts, comments, feedback along the way. It's great to see. Until then, that's going to be all for us from now. Hopefully we'll see you at new upcoming courses. I don't think there's any in August, but we'll have more to come in September onwards. If you're on this list, you will get notified. So there will definitely be an email come to you letting you know when the next course is, but you'll have to enroll for it. You're not automatically enrolled, but you'll be notified. So hopefully we'll see you at the next one. Thanks very much, and from now, from all of us, goodbye and good night.